Hello, and welcome back to unit number 3. In this unit, we're going to be talking about the bottom divider inside of Cubase. So the bottom divider is this middle button right here in the top right corner. And if we click on that, we're going to see that we find 4 tabs on the bottom of this. One of them we're going to disregard because it's going to have its own separate lesson. But we have the mix console, we have the editor, which is going to have your piano editor, it's going to have the score editor, and it's going to have something called the drum editor. Next to that, we have the sampler control, and then we have chord pads. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about the editor, which is going to have the piano roll. So the only way we're able to see information inside of this editor is if we are clicked on a region. So in this case, I have a blank region, and I created that with the pencil tool. And now if I click on it, we're going to see the space that the region has here from measures 1 to 5. Here we see measure 1 to 5. Now if I zoom in a little bit, you're going to see that now we could see our piano roll, and we're ready to begin this lesson. So the piano roll is essentially where you're going to create your MIDI notes. In today's production, in today's music, most things inside of productions are made inside of a DAW like this. Like Cubase, like Logic, like DP even. So it's going to look something like this. And we have a keyboard on the left. And then we have the notes here kind of laid out like a keyboard too. So this is C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, so on and so forth. In order to input notes inside of this piano roll, you have to choose the pencil tool, and then you're just going to click on the square that you want the note to appear in. So if I go ahead and zoom in, I've placed a note here, a C, and I'm going to change the quantized value to 16th notes so that they can come out a little bigger. And now I'm going to, let's say, put a D here, and then an F here, and then A and C. There I drew in 5 notes using the pencil tool. You can also play it on your keyboard, which we won't get into right now because this, again, is a course on the technical aspects inside of Cubase. So that's how we draw notes inside of Cubase. Let's say we want to delete them. We can go with the eraser tool and we could delete it like this. We also have a blade tool inside of the piano editor, which is not found inside of the main tools up here in the project window. So if I click this blade tool, which they call the trim tool, anything after the note is going to be deleted. So if I go ahead and let's say I stretch this note out to bar number 2, and I grab my blade tool and I say, well, I don't want anything past this beat here. Let me just grab my blade tool and I'm going to cut here, and it's automatically going to cut everything that comes after. It is very different than the scissors tool, which only splits the note. So if I do this, I split the note in 2. But the blade tool just cuts everything after that. So that's one of the main new tools that the piano roll has over the project window. So you're going to notice that the layout of the piano roll is pretty similar to what we saw in the project window, where we have toolbar functions up here where you can edit what you want to see on the right side. You can also edit what you want to see in the bottom portion here. So essentially it holds most of the same tools inside of the project window with some tweaks here and there. So for example, on the left side here, we have a solo editor. So let's say you're playing back your instruments, and I have 4 instruments out here, and I play from measure 1. It's going to play all 4 instruments at the same time. But if I'm working on this one contact instrument and I just want to hear this one instrument that I'm looking at, I'm going to hit the solo button, and what it does is that it's only going to play back the region that's inside of the piano roll. So for example, this one is the only one that's going to be heard. If I take off solo mode, then you're going to hear the rest of the tracks that you have available in the piano roll. The button right next to it is a record and editor, so I can record while looking at information inside of the piano roll as well. So it's not just in the project window that I can record. I can also record in here and see how the notes are moving inside of the piano roll. On the right side of it, you can turn what we call pitch visibility on and off. So what that means is that depending on the key that this song is in this case it's C major, if I click on this, the notes are only going to be comprised of the notes in the key of C. So you only see C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. This is a little bit theoretical, and you do need to have some basic music theory knowledge to understand how this works. But essentially, it's only the key of C because this project is in the key of C. So now the question is, what if you want to see something else that's not the key of C? If we open up the left window here, you're going to see that if we go to click inside the piano roll, notice how they have these solid white lines here. This means that you're clicked inside of the piano roll. You're going to see a couple things to the left. You're going to see expression maps. You're going to see note expression. You're going to see scale assistant, chord editing, quantize, transpose, and length. So the one we're going to be focusing on in this one in particular is going to be the scale assistant. So here it's in the key of C, as we can see. If I want it to be in the key of D, now the notes have shifted, and now I see notes in the key of D. So it's included C sharp and F sharp in this key. I can make it minor, any scale I want. So let's say I want it to be natural minor. You're now going to see that I have B flats. And in this case, in dolls, they like to use sharps instead of flats. So it's A sharp. So I'm just going to go ahead and put it back to C major. And again, we have our natural notes. So this is the cool way for you to just focus on the notes that are available to you in a key instead of just by accident putting an F sharp or G sharp or something that's not part of the key. You can change that right here. So now moving along this bar here, we have things like link, project, and lower zone together. So if I press play right now, notice how the cursor in the project window is moving at the same time as the piano editor. So if I take this link off, you're going to see that it's not going to follow. And I also need to take off this here where it says auto scroll so that it doesn't sync up to the top one. If I press play now, notice how the piano roll moves in a different pace than the project window. I like keeping those on because they move at the same time, and that way I can see what's happening in the project window at the same time as my piano roll. Moving a little bit to the right, we're going to see we have our toolbar, which we know how this works already, and we did some examples with the line tool, so you know how the line tool works as well. We have things like quantizing, so nothing new. We can quantize these notes to specific beats inside of each measure. And then to the right of that, we have the currently edited part. So let's say I create another region. So I'm going to duplicate this track. And now I have two copies of the same thing. Now, let's say I highlight both of them. Let me actually modify some notes here so that you can see the difference. So I want this one to be G, this one to be low here, this one will be C. Okay, let's do it like that. So now we have a difference between these two. So when I highlight them, you can clearly see that one is playing in the middle and the other one is playing out here. Let me move this first note too so you can see the distinction of the four notes. So now we see that we have a bottom figure and a top figure. Now, depending on which one you're on here is going to show the notes that are highlighted. So if the notes are highlighted dark, it means you're on that active part. So in this case, I need to change the name here. So I'm going to put contact. Let's put contact 2. And this region here, let's call it contact 2 as well. And now when I go here, you're going to see that when I highlight both of them, we're seeing contact 2. It's the one we move the notes around. If I go to contact 1, you're going to see that now those notes fade and the middle notes are active. Now what happens is if I want this to show the borders of the region, so I know that anything before this is not being seen or being seen, I could click this so they could show me the border, which is also helpful because now I can also see the measure numbers up here. So this button to the right of this is what we call edit active part only. Now, what this does is now, let's say I highlight a group thing and I have this on. It's only going to highlight the notes that I'm actively working on, like this. And now if I stretch it out, it's only going to stretch out the active part only. If I take this and I go to number 2, same thing. If I highlight them all, then I drag. You're going to see that I only move the active part only. But if I don't have this on and I highlight all of them, then all parts are going to get included in this time stretch that I'm doing here. So this is a very handy button to get to know. To the right of it, we have the way we see the colors or the way we see the notes inside of the piano roll. So we could see things like velocity. So let's say this one, it has a very high velocity. So if I grab all of these and I raise the velocity like this, notice how I raised it with this velocity thing here. And if you don't see this menu here, I'm going to remove it. You can click this plus sign, go to create velocity controller lane. And now I can drag this and make this bigger. Notice how now this is a bright red. And if I move to number 2 and I create a very soft velocity, it's going to be blue. Now, when I go and I move to 1, you're going to see that now it fades in some kind of a bluish color. It's telling me that I'm looking at the velocity color here. That's how I can make the distinction between part 1 and part 2. I can also choose things like pitch. So every different pitch is going to have a different color. I could do things like channel. I could do things like part, which is going to take the color of the actual part in the grid here. So let's say this one was actually, I'm going to color this, and the way I did that was holding Option on my computer, and then I'm going to click on the color here and then choose a color. Let's say I want it green. Oh, they were both highlighted. Sorry about that. Let me go ahead and do it now. So I'm going to do it, let's say orange. So now when I highlight both of them, one's going to be green and one's going to be orange. That's what color by parts is. The ones you'll mainly probably end up using is velocity, maybe pitch, and part. Those are the three main ones that I find myself using the most. So the other ones, you can play around with it and see which one works best for you. You can also edit the MIDI instrument or the instrument that you're using inside of this easily by opening the editor right here. Instead of finding it or pressing the keyboard right here, we can edit it right here. So now, if you go to the right here, you can open this window in a separate window. So if I click on this, you're going to have a big window with the piano roll things in here. So you can use that as a separate window as well. And then you can customize what you want to see here. You can do things like the status line if you want to see the status line, if you want to see controller lanes, and the info line. So if we move on to the left side here, again, if we open up the left side by the top right corner here, you're going to see that there are more options to the left that can help you further edit these notes inside of the piano roll. So now we have things like expression maps. So expression maps is a bit complicated if you are new to a DAW, so I'm going to go ahead and explain it as best as I can here. If you already know how expression maps work, you can go ahead and skip along to the next section of this video. So expression maps are essentially ways that you can change the articulation of instruments in a sample library. So in a sample library, you might get things like key switches. Now what key switches are if, let's say, you're playing a long note on a violin patch, and you want to switch to short notes, a key switch is a note designated inside the sample library that's usually out of the way, out of the range of the instrument, somewhere down here or somewhere all the way up here, that when you click that note, and let's say it's G minus 2, that means that now every note past this one is going to be short. And let's say you want to go back to longs, you have to click it right before the next note, and then let's say D minus 1 is going to be the longs. So now this is how you're able to control the different ways or different styles of playing these sample libraries can do. Now what expression maps are is that instead of using these key switches, expression map says I can do that right on the note itself. So instead of going down here and doing G minus 2, I can go to D3, go to expression map setup, and I don't have a setup for that now, but you go to an expression map setup and you say, I want this note to be short, and I want this note to be long, and I want this note to be short again. I can just go in here, identify it, and then where it says articulation, I can create the shorts, the longs, the legatos, any kind of articulation I want, and attach it to the note itself instead of drawing extra notes. This is a more advanced tool, which is way beyond the scope of this course, but that was just a brief explanation of what expression maps can do. Now we have note expression, so we have things like CC1, CC2, which we can find those things down here if we click the plus sign, and you could see how they work here. So if I'm on CC1, I could see the curve here, and this essentially controls things like dynamics in a sample library. Scale Assistant, we did touch upon that when I was showing you the line tool and how we can change this from the piano to the scale that we're in based on this region. So below that we have chord editing. You have things like quantize. So if you open quantize, you're going to see that now, let's say some of these notes are offbeat. Let's actually switch the quantize to, or take it off completely. So I'm going to take off snap mode by turning it off by clicking this button next to grid. And now I can move these notes freely. Now, if I move the note and it's a little bit off, I can go into the quantize menu and I could say, you know what, apply this quantize because I want this to be on beat 1. There you go. And if now, let's say a whole bunch of notes were out of the way, instead of you going one by one and clicking them, you just highlight them all, apply quantize, and they will snap right back into it. You could do things like apply the quantize strength. So if I do soft quantize and you do a 41%, it won't put them exactly on the line. It will put them approximately on the line, so you can get a little bit more of a live feel if you are working with MIDI. You can select the quantized types, so you can select triplets, you can select 16th notes, 8th notes, things like that. You could do tuplets, you could do swing, and all these other options that you have available to you in order to set the quantize to exactly the way you want it. Now, next we have transpose. So here you could transpose everything into, let's say, 2 semitones up, apply transpose, and now everything moves up a whole step. 2 semitones is 2 half steps, which equals a whole step. I'm gonna hit undo to bring that back. And now I'm gonna go down to length, and here you could just choose the lengths of these notes. If I want to apply the legato or not, you could go ahead and do it numerically here and choose the length that you want these notes to be in. So this wraps up the basic explanation of the piano roll and some of the tools and features that we have featured inside of Cubase using the piano roll to edit your MIDI notes. In the next video, we're going to talk about the chord editor. In this next lesson, we are going to talk about the chord editor, and I'm going to show you how to set up the chord editor so you have a chord track and then you have a source for the sound for your chords. So let's go ahead and open up a chord track. So I'm going to go ahead and right click inside of this empty space and create a chord track. Once the chord track is created, this is where you're able to write what chords you want to play. So for example, if I grab my pencil tool and I draw in some chords in here, they're going to say X for now. So the way we change the name of these chords, obviously X is not a chord. We're going to double click on these chord symbols, and here it gives you the layout. It gives you the letter you want to choose, quality, and then you have the tensions. So you have sevenths and 13s and stuff like that. And then on the right side, you could choose what is in the bass. So for example, if I wanted this to be a C major 7, the J stands for major 7. If you do just a regular 7, it'll be a dominant 7 chord. And again, I'm diving a little bit into music theory. If you do not understand music theory, it's okay. I'm just showing you how this works. So let's say I want a major 7, and then the C major 7, I want the, let's say the G to be in the bass. That's how you get these slash chords in here as well. So right now, if I play this back, you hear nothing. And that's because you need a source for the sound for this chord track. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up an instrument. I can hit this plus button, and here is the window that pops up, and I'm going to grab an instrument track. So it's just a different way to open up the track. If you wanted a chord track from this window, then you would hit more tracks, and then here you see the chord track. So I'm going to go for an instrument track, and then I'm going to choose my instrument. In this case, I'm going to use Keyscape, which is a piano sound. And here is the plugin, and now I'm going to go to Grand Piano, and here is the sound for it. So before I get to use it, I need to go to where it says Use Monitor Tracks, and then hit Keyscape 1. Now when I play it back, you hear the sound now. So let me turn off the metronome so it's not in the way. Let's say I wanted this to be the first chord. All I do is just rearrange it like this. I could just move it around. And let's say for this one, I don't want that G in the bass. I want here an F major 7. I want this to be I want this next chord to be an E7. And then I want this next chord to be an A minor. So let me just go ahead and draw it out with the pencil here. This is going to be an A minor 7. So let's hear what we have so far. And then here I'm going to finish off the sequence just so we have some kind of finale. We're going to call this, oh, I muted it by accident. Let me go ahead and call this a D minor 7. Or I can do a D minor 7. Let's do a flat 5 to G 7. We can also add a tension here and then go back, and let's do end on a C minor 9 chord. And now here we have a chord progression. Again, I'm just showing you how to quickly just go through these chords and how you can construct music using the chord track. And this is just using a simple pencil and choosing the chords of your liking. So here is the chord progression. There you have it. So this is how you use the chord track when you're arranging, let's say you're songwriting, and you just want to have a chord track to sing over, to improvise over, and you don't have the right feel yet. You can just do this and it'll just kind of have it there as a placeholder, and then you could go in and write in rhythms with your own MIDI notes, perform it on the keyboard, or you can have someone else record the piano part for you. So another way we can see these chord tracks is if we go into the bottom layer here and we hit where it says chord pads. So in this little section here, if you don't see this for any reason, then you're going to hit this little gear sign and you got to make sure that it's checked here. If it's not checked, then go ahead and check it and then it will appear. So now these are the chords that they give you for now because we are in the key of C. So if I play these chords, let me go into the piano sound. You see that I'm able to play this. Now let's say I wanted to change some of these chords. Well, this one on the left is going to open the editor, which is the same window that we saw in the project window, except we have it here, and here we can change some of these chords. So if I wanted to be a D, I can make it a D chord. So now I'm going to go back to the C chord, and I could do this with all the chords, so all of this can be altered and changed. If I go to the bottom section here is what we call tension, so we can add color to the chord. So for example, we have just a basic triad C, we can have a C9, we can have a C6, a C6-9, major 7, so on and so forth. And you could create some interesting colors if you don't know how to play piano or you don't understand music theory or whatever the case may be, and you would just want to add more colors to your tracks. Well, here you can not only play them, but you can also hear what they sound like. So now the one to the right of it is now changing the voicing of it. So the voicing of the chord is essentially, instead of playing, let's say, a chord starting from the note C, it'll start from a different note. So for example, there's C, E, G in the triad for C. So let me go back to the basic C major chord. And instead of starting on the C, I want to start on E. There's starting on the E right there. And as you can see, all the voicings change also across all of the chords here because it's following proper what we call voice leading. But again, that's outside of the scope of this course, but this is how you change the voicings of these chords. You can go in and you could change whatever chord you want so that they're available in this chord pad for you. Now, the way you record this is, let's say you just hit your metronome, turn on the record button. Oh, let me actually take off those chords in the top section here. Just going to delete it with the delete key on my keyboard. And now I'm going to go back into the chord pad. So now to enter these chords, I'm going to go into the piano track. I'm going to go hit down, and then I'm going to press record on my keyboard, which is the asterisk button on your keyboard if you have a full-size keyboard in the number pad section. So I'm going to press that, and then I'm going to click on these chords. And as you can see, they record it in MIDI notes. If I open up the piano roll, you're able to see that these chords show up here. So going back to the chord pad, that's how you use the chord pad, and that's how you record chords into your DAW using the sounds that we have, which is the piano sound here. So now let's go a little bit deeper. Let's say we want to go and edit some of these, but edit in bulk. So if I go to this little E here, which is the edit button, here I can choose things like voicing. So I could choose things that are generally used in pop, altered jazz, rock. I could do plain chords, patterns, or sections. So I could play these. If I hit pattern, for example, let's listen. So you see that the dynamic of the chord changes. It sounds like someone's actually looping some kind of pattern. And you can also import some of your own loops if you have some arpeggios or things that you like to play on your keyboard. You could just load it up here and then have the DAW take care of the rest. So if I open up this next one, is called the Chord Assistant. Now what this does is it shows you chords that are relatively close to the key that you're working in. So if I'm in the key of C, for example, the closest key signatures around the key of C are going to be these four. Then goes the 6, then it's just this one, then we have this larger one, then we have ones that are very far away from the key of C major. So if I play this chord, and then I play this chord, it sounds very awkward because, again, it's really far from the key. If I play C, and I go to B flat, that sounds more like it could belong in the key of C. So it's important, if you don't know music theory, that this chart, you understand how it works and just understand the basics of this chart. We can also do things in the circle of fifths. So if you know the circle of fifths, we know that it goes to the right in fifths and to the left in fourths. So we could just do and use this chart instead. Again, I'm not going to go too in depth in the music theory in this because this is a tech class. So that's all I'll say about that. If I exit and go into chord pad presets, so here you can load up presets from other chord patches that you've made. You've already, let's say, identified which chords you want to use in this track and you've laid it out here, then you could pull it up at any time. And if you hit it down here, you can have some other options to work with these pads. So for example, transpose all pads. If I hit this button and say I want to transpose this up a whole step, that means everything here is going to transpose up a whole step. So C is going to be D, D is going to be E, E is going to be F sharp, like so. So that's how you transpose all of the pads. So this is the basics into getting into the chord editor. As you can see, it's a very powerful tool. And if your piano skills aren't sharp, then this is a great way to just lay out the chords that you're hearing in your head and put them into Cubase and have Cubase kind of take care of the playing and the voicings of the chords. And then when you're ready to record with an actual pianist and you have your vocal lines or guitar lines down and you want to send it to someone who is a professional pianist or a good friend that plays piano, then you could get that done that way. So now we're going to move on to the next section of this video, and it's the audio editor. I'll see you guys soon. In this next lesson, we're going to go into the audio editor and some of the tools that come with the audio editor. So we have our piece of audio here, which is just me saying that this is a test for the audio editor in Cubase. And we're going to go ahead and see some of the tools we have to manipulate this audio track in case you need to do any kind of editing with audio. And how do you get internally, instead of just the usual chopping in the project window, how do we get internally and see some of the things that we can do with the audio. So if I double click this, it's going to open up this bottom half again. Now, keep in mind that if I exit out of this bottom half and I try to find it here, I won't get an editor. It has to be that you double click in audio waveform in the project window so that you're able to see the audio in here. There's no piano roll, and the score editor and the drum editor is all on one little channel here that you can hit a little arrow. With the audio, it doesn't work that way. So make sure you double click here or open it and click the region. Okay, so let's get into the window here. So on the top left corner, we have a solo editor. So let's say we have tracks under this and there are multiple tracks in the session and we just want to hear this one particular region. Then we just hit the solo button and then you're only going to hear this specific sound when you're playing it back. So here is the sound. So this is a test for the audio editor inside of Cubase. So that is the test sound. So you have a couple different options here. So here we have an audition function. So the way we audition is we play it and it's only going to play the sound in here. Now you might notice that it's not actually playing any sound, and it's a little weird, but Cubase has this so that when you audition, it's set up in control room, not inside of the project window for some reason. So if you go to audio outputs here and click on it, you're going to get this window to pop up. And you could set up control room by going to control room, open this up, and then go to monitor left and just assign your outputs to whatever outputs you're using in your interface. And now when I hit audition, so this is a test for the audio editor inside of Cubase. So for some reason, this only works with control room, which I recommend setting up and having that ready to go because control room is a very powerful tool and we will look at it in depth in a later lesson in this course. So I'm just going to go ahead and connect my outputs back to where I had it so that we can hear the things inside of the project window. And we're going to move forward. So the next one right next to it is what we call the audition loop. So you can just create a loop so that it can continue playing whatever it is that you're trying to audition. Next, we have audition volume. So if you're auditioning this track, you have a volume here. If you hold drag up or down, you can control the volume of the audition. Next, we have the auto scroll, we have the acoustics feedback, and then we have the toolbar. So here the toolbar is kind of similar to what we have up here, just with less things to do because we don't necessarily need all of the tools inside of an audio editor. So here we have a range selector. Here you have a pencil. You can actually draw in waveforms in here to correct, let's say, clipping. So if I zoom in really close, so we can actually draw in waveforms. So we can avoid popping and clipping. So that's pretty cool, but you have to be very zoomed in to be able to conform these waveforms. As you can see, it was giving me an error when I'm here. So please zoom to a resolution that is lower than 1. So I'm going to undo that just to make sure that our audio is saved and sounds good. Next, we have the zoom tool, which of course you zoom in a portion. You have the scrub tool, so you can scrub through this. Again, if it's set up in control room, you're able to hear this. Next, we have the time warp tool. So same thing, if I wanted something to land in a specific beat, I can grab it and I can shift it over just like this. And then next we have the playback tool. So if I play this and hold it, you're able to hear it inside of the control room, of course, because anything you do here is routed to the control room. So if I play it from here, you're going to see a blue screen in the back kind of moving, panning all the way through to show you where you are inside of the audio. Next, we have things like the snap to zero crossing. So let's say you have 2 audio tracks. Zero crossing is, if I zoom in really close, the zero crossing point in any audio form is this line here. So this is a zero crossing, meaning that at this level right here, there's technically no sound at all. So snap to zero crossing means if you have, let's say, 2 audio files and you want it to merge them together and you put snap to zero crossing, the audio form is going to try to find that zero crossing point. So when you fade them in, you don't hear any popping or clipping. So here we have the snap on and off, which is quantized, which we talked about up there. Same thing here. So if I highlight over this, this is the number of bars defined in the audio form. This is the remaining number of beats defined in the audio file. Here is the defined tempo. Here is the algorithm for the kind of time stretching you're going to do. In case you want to stretch this, you could warp it. And this is the time signature, of course. And then here we have the same thing as we had in the piano roll, which is you can edit the layer that you're working on. So this is called test 01. If we have another track, then we can go to test 02, 3, so on and so forth. If you want to edit just one, then you can just hit activate only the one that you're looking at. If you want to take off those borders, then you could press that and take off the borders. And this one here is to show all selected audio events inside of the audio editor. And here again, we can choose what kind of color we want to see this in. So we can see it in event, chord track, pitch, and so on and so forth. Since there's no information like that and it's just blue, we're just going to see it blue for now. You have the option to customize this as well. So you can see that you have all of the same options as you have in the piano editor. Same thing with the bottom line here. The info line, you can filter some of these things. So notice how here it tells you the sample rate, the bit depth it was recorded in, the length of it, global transposing, the processing has no processing right now, the bars, so it's bars and beats instead of seconds and times, something like that. The offline edit, and then here is the zoom magnification level. We have the selection, we have the current pitch, and then we have the original pitch. You can modify any of these things here and take out what you don't need or what you want to see. Now on the left side of the audio editor here, we have a couple of other options. So just like with the piano roll, on the side, we have things like definition. So you can adjust these parameters. Like for example, instead of musical mode, we could be in time-based mode. So this is working with minutes and seconds instead. I'm going to leave it in musical mode because we want to work with bars and beats. The next thing to talk about is audio warp. So this is what we were talking about warping this sound with Elastic Pro. So if you want to use any of these tools, you got to make sure you turn it on. So by turning it on, you click this button here, and now you have the options available to you. So here you could choose the quantization of this, how you want to swing it. So you can swing it and notice how it starts to warp a little bit. And when I play it back for the audio editor inside of Cubase, you can hear that it sounds a little weird because this is a spoken word. You probably do this with an instrument. You could do things like free warp. So you can actually go in and now move these audio waveforms on your own to, let's say, sync a beat or whatever the case may be. So now I'm going to go back and undo all of this. Now we're going to turn this off and we're going to go to Very Audio. So Very Audio is the equivalent to Melodyne, but in Cubase. And this is a very powerful tool to pitch correct any of your performances. So to turn it on, we have to hit this button here, and you're going to see that now Cubase has analyzed and said these are where the pitches are in your whatever performance. So if I go ahead and click play, test for the audio editor inside of Cubase, and I go here and I say, let me shift this up. Let's see what happens. Test for the audio editor in. So notice how that moved up in pitch. If I grab another one, so let me hit Very Audio here, and then I move this down. Let's see what it sounds like. Test for the audio editor inside. So you can see how powerful this is. Let's say just for kicks and giggles, we want to move some of these. Again, I'm going to turn on the Very Audio so that it allows me to move it. I'm going to highlight all of these, and then I'm going to drag it down. Test for the audio editor inside of Cubase. So that's pretty neat. You could do this in absolute mode or relative, meaning you want it absolutely on the pitch or you want it somewhat on the pitch so that you can give a little bit more of a natural feel. Because sometimes in performances, you don't want it to snap on directly on the pitch because then it sounds very auto-tuned. So we don't want that kind of sound. If that's what you're going for, then that's what you're going to use. If that, then you want to choose the relative mode. Here you could do other things, so like quantize the pitch. You could raise the strength in that, straighten the curve. Let's say you have vibrato or something like that. You can straighten the curve so that you get a straight tone. You could do shift format and you could do volume. So let's go ahead and check out what these parameters do. So I'm going to go back into the Very Audio from the beginning. So let me turn this off. And then I'm going to go into Very Audio and turn it on. Test for the audio editor inside of Cubase. So let's go ahead and raise all of these pitches back up to where they can sound somewhat decent. Let's say like right here. Test for the audio editor. Test for the audio editor inside of Cubase. So we'll just leave it there. Now let's go ahead and see what these squares do. So the squares are actually a replica of what these parameters are. So if I highlight the square, this is the warp tool. So here I can actually stretch a word out, or I can diminish the space for that word. So let's go ahead and leave it where it was. This top one is to straighten pitch curve, which is this one right here, straighten the curve. So if I raise it, you're going to see that parameter also moves like so. Here I have the warp end, so I can also do the end of it. And then here I have quantized pitch. So if I move it, you're going to see that the quantized pitch of this note is also going to move. So it's moved to 6%. This is the Very Audio. It's really just things that you have to experiment with when you're working on your tracks to see what is the best settings for whatever style of music that you're going for. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn off Very Audio, and we're going to move on to the next one. So hit points are all the beats inside of your, or the beats that Cubase can recognize inside of your track here. So here you can see that we have, let's say, this one right here, and you could play back some of these slices or not. So here what you could do is you can select the threshold of how hard you want this to detect the points. The higher the threshold, then the more you're going to receive in here. The lower the threshold, the more transient points you're going to get. So let me just actually type 0 here, like so. We also have things like intensity. So the lower the intensity, the more you're going to get from this. The higher the intensity, the less you're going to get from this. So notice how those yellow dots start to disappear. And again, you're going to lose some of those transients that you were looking for. If I put this down to 0 now, you're going to see that those slices are going to come back. So you could do things like in quarter notes, eighth notes, 16th notes, 32nd notes. You could remove these hit points. So if I hit remove, then you're going to take them out, and now it's going to be a big chunk again. You can create slices from it, create grooves. All of these things you're able to do with these little sections. So this is how you create, for example, like samples and stuff. So you would create these slices, and essentially it'll export it as a separate region. So if I click this here, now this is what I'm left with. It literally analyzed the entire thing and gave me just the slices of audio that I wanted. So I'm going to go ahead and exit out of here and go back to my big audio waveform. And now we're going to go and see the range. So the range is just telling you where in the music where the range is of this track from -1 to bar 2. Here it just tells you. And then we have create a sampler track, so I can grab this and just create a sampler track with it. So if I click this button, it's going to create a sampler track.
So this is a test for the audio editor inside of Cubase.
And create an instrument out of it. So that's also very cool. So you can do all the editing in there, the chopping, whatever it is that you need to do. And then you could just bounce it out into a sampler track, and then you get something like this. We'll talk more about the sampler track in a later part of this lesson. So going back into the audio waveform, you have now the last one, which is process. Now, this is where you can add things like fade in, fade outs, process it. You can add plugins in here. You can add audio functions in here. You could do flatten in order to kind of put all of these sounds integrated into the audio waveform so that you can get a more intricate sound. And now you don't need to essentially waste any space in your inserts when you're mixing. You could do it here if you know for sure that that's the sound that you're going for. So if I add a plugin, and let's say I want some kind of reverb, let's do the Pro R. And then I go over here to the right, you're going to see that the direct offline processing window is going to turn on. Now what this is what we were talking about, the advanced tool where you can apply effects directly onto the sound itself instead of doing it on the mixture window. So this is how we do it here. Here's one way to do it.
Test for the audio editor inside of Cubase.
So here, if I hit process, then it's going to process this audio and essentially make a hard copy of this audio with the reverb inside of it. So that is the basics of the audio editor. I hope this is very useful to you if you're creating, let's say, original sample libraries, or you're chopping up vocals to play them in your keyboard for, let's say, electronic music. Then this is a great way for you to manipulate some of the pitches. And you see some of the tools that you have in here to take advantage of that will speed up the workflow and give you more time creating your songs. In the next video, we are going to talk about the score editor with some of its tools. So I will see you soon. So this is the last topic in this unit, and we are going to talk about the score editor. Now, the score editor is essentially a way of you to edit the notes on essentially staff paper inside of Cubase. So if we go ahead and just open up a region, because this does not work if you do not have a region active. So I'm just going to open up a region, and I'm going to double tap on this region, and then I'm going to go here to this little arrow and select score editor. So here is another way for you to input notes inside of Cubase without using the piano roll. If you like looking at notation better, then here is the way to do it. So again, the layout is almost identical with the exception of a few new tools that the score editor has. So if there are more tracks inside of the project window and this is the only one you want to be heard, then you would hit this solo button and you would be able to hear just this track. Here you have the record in editor, so you can record in real time looking at the editor. We have the auto scroll, we have our toolbar, we have the note insertion velocity. So just like on the keyboard, you would hit it really hard to get a different velocity or softer. You can just input a number for the velocity in here. You could change the number to any amount you want from 0 to 127. You have quantizing, so you can snap things to the grid. You have this option here, which gives you multiple options. So you have keep notes within key, snap slurs to notes, keep crescendo cymbals horizontal, snap rest, and repeats vertically. Here we have the way we're looking at it. So if we're editing multiple parts, you could do the same thing by part color, channel color, velocity color, so on and so forth. We have quantizing options here. You have the option to filter out things here in the toolbar, just like all the other sections in Cubase, as well as the bottom portion here. So the way we insert notes inside of Cubase is I'm going to hit the musical note here, which is the insert note, the new tool inside of this, and I choose the note value I want to insert. So let's say I want a whole note, and I want to put C. So notice how I put it to C sharp. If I just grab my pointer tool, highlight that C, and then I could just go ahead and drag this down or up by clicking and holding and dragging. So you could change the value of the notes here. You could change, like, let's say you wanted to have a sharp in it. So if I highlight it like this and then go to any of these sharp notes, I can add a sharp. I can add a flat. Let's say a double sharp, a double flat, things like that. You can go ahead and add it in here. So I'm not going to go through all of these symbols because this is part of music theory. We're going to move over to the left side here, and we're going to see things like the keys that you could put in here. So let's say I want to see the key of G major in here, and click right in between the time signature and the treble clef, and I just hit click. You're going to see that the key of G major pops up. Let's say I want an E major, I could just easily just change it like that. You could change things like the clef. So if I want bass clef, again, just go and click on it, and now we're in bass clef. Change that back to treble. And let's say my time signature, same thing. If I want 12/4, click. Now I have a 12/4 time signature. So we have the option to do expression maps here. We have dynamic mapping. We have the note symbols. So dynamic expression is like volume. If you want crescendo, decrescendo, forte, piano. Note symbols, these are the note symbols you have here. Dynamics, again, these are very easy to put in. You just go, click on it, and then you insert like this. So highlight, insert. Very simple to do. Like things like this kind of glissando, this strumming. You could just click on it. There you go. It's inserted here. And you can move these things around up and down and stuff. So you can get it out of the way if they're in the way of things. You can stretch it out. And then we have the form symbols. So like, let's say we have DCL coda. Let's say if we have rehearsal numbers, first and second ending, the del segno, fine, all these things, you can find it here. And again, it's just as simple as clicking, and then you click on here, and then you drag it out to wherever it is that you need to. So that is the basics into the score editor. Again, if you are familiar with music theory and you're familiar with these tools, then you could easily get along and start writing some professional scores right inside of Cubase. As you can see, the functions are very simple. You just click, and you'll be inserting notes in no time. In the next unit, we are going to be talking about the left and right zones. I will see you guys soon.